The hearing will now come to order. We will start with opening statements. I'll start first. We're still waiting on the ranking member, Mr. Tonko, and I think Chairman Upton. We will then give them the opportunity to give their opening statements when they arrive. So I'll recognize myself for 5 minutes. Today we examine legislation that creates a framework for better understanding and addressing the risk posed by algal toxins and can show up in some drinking water. I thank Representative Latta for his efforts on this issue and for bringing it to the subcommittee's attention last fall. Some folks may be tempted to think there are easy solutions to this problem, but from our hearing this past November, we learned we have a long way to go to understand it. The diversity of algae and their habitats only complicate the problem. The legislation we are reviewing moves in the right direction. First, the legislation requires EPA within 90 days to develop and submit a strategic plan to Congress for assessing and managing risk from cyanotoxins in drinking water provided by public water systems. This plan will detail the 6 critical steps as well as the timelines EPA intends to use. Identify information gaps to be filled and evaluate human health risk. Publish a comprehensive list of algal toxins that are harmful as well as what those harmful effects are. Identify what makes these algae harmful. Determine how to use public health advisories to inform testing and monitoring of these algal toxins, as well as look at where EPA needs better information for testing and monitoring. And then suggest treatment options, and finally provide technical assistance to states and public water systems. Most importantly, this strategic plan is a living document and can be updated as warranted after the deadline expires. H.R. 212 or 212 also call on EPA to consult with other federal agencies, states, and others actively analyzing cyanotoxins and their impact on public health, and to publish the information possessed by the federal government. Finally, H.R. 212 requires the Government Accountability Office to inventory and report to Congress on federal spending between fiscal years 2010 and 2014 on analysis and public health efforts of the federal government on cyanotoxins, including the specific purpose for which the funds were made available, the law under which the funds were authorized, the federal agency that received or spent the funds, and recommended steps to reduce any duplication and improve interagency coordination of such expenditures. I want to welcome and thank our witnesses who are joining us and rejoining us today, as the case may be. We look forward to hearing from them on what happened this past August in Ohio and what lessons were learned and whether H.R. 212 helps. We'll also get a better sense of what drinking water treatment professionals need to better prepare to handle these events. We're all eager to hear from our witnesses. And with that, I yield. I have some time remaining, seeing no gentleman from Ohio.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And first I want to thank you for calling this hearing today, and also I want to thank our witnesses for being here. I really appreciate working with Dr. Gravatt and Mr. Baker and their offices over the past months on this issue. Their expertise and guidance has been an immense help in putting together the quality bill that is before us today in H.R. 212, the Drinking Water Protection Act, that will help ensure our citizens' public drinking water and health are protected from the threat of algal toxins. This working relationship has and continues to be a perfect example of how the federal government and the states can work together to put forth quality solutions to problems that affect millions of our citizens. Unfortunately, the cyanotoxins and algal toxins in public drinking water produced from harmful algal blooms are presenting a serious concern for our nation's citizens. Last August, over 500,000 people in the Toledo area, many of which are residents of my district, were unable to utilize their water for over 2 days without risking potentially negative health effects due to a high level of the cyanotoxin microcystin LR detected in the city's water supply. During that time, both concerns and questions were raised about the testing protocols, treatment processes, and appropriate responses on how to respond to the problem in the short term. I know from my personal experience that the state, including Mr. Baker and the Ohio EPA Director Butler, worked tirelessly with U.S. EPA and with the city and other local officials to get this situation under control. I commend their hard work and the steps they have taken since to try to ensure that this does not occur again. Furthermore, while microcystin LR is believed to be the most common and toxic variant, countless other microcystin variants and other algotoxins threaten the health and safety of public drinking water. Unfortunately, scientific and health data and research has not kept up with this growing complicated problem. I believe H.R. 212, the Drinking Water Protection Act, which will put forth a strategic plan for assessing and managing risks associated with cyanotoxins in drinking water provided by public water systems, takes the robust and strong scientific approach we need to protect the health and safety of our public drinking water and better understand this issue in the short term and in the long term. Again, I want to thank you all for being here today. I greatly appreciate all your hard work on this and the testimony that you're going to give today. And Mr. Chairman, I'd also like to thank the committee staff and my staff for their hard work on this legislation. With that, I yield back.
The gentleman yields back his time. Chair now recognizes the ranking member of the full committee, Mr. Pallone, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Harmful algal blooms are a serious and growing threat to public health. The toxins they produce threaten communities that draw their water from coastal areas and the Great Lakes, and they also pose risk to those who swim in contaminated waters or eat contaminated fish. Health impacts include skin and eye irritation, gastrointestinal illness, cancer, paralysis, and even death. Economic impacts are also serious, affecting fishing, recreation, and tourism. Estimates of annual costs in the United States are in the billions. This summer, Toledo, Ohio experienced a profound disruption when citizens woke to a do-not-drink order. And as we will hear from the second panel, the impacts were significant and widespread. But the problem, and I stress, is not limited to Ohio or Lake Erie. Harmful algal blooms have been a recurring problem in my home state in New Jersey for decades. And so I appreciate that the majority is taking up this bipartisan legislation to begin to address this important environmental problem. I'm happy to say that language we will consider later today reflects several changes sought by Democratic members of the subcommittee, and I thank the chairman and the majority staff for working with us to improve the bill. For too long, Republicans in Congress have been more interested in attacking EPA than supporting the important work the agency does to protect human health, and safe drinking water should be a bipartisan issue. So I hope this bill can be the start of broader drinking water work to address important threats like climate change, fracking, security, and aging infrastructure. My colleague from New York, the ranking member, Mr. Tonko of the subcommittee, has been a leader on drinking water infrastructure issues, and I hope we can all work together on his legislation to reauthorize the SRF. Resources are central to the conversation about safe drinking water. Much of our nation's drinking water infrastructure is well beyond its useful life and in desperate need of replacement. Algae and other emerging threats spurred by climate change and other factors add to the challenge. Investing in drinking water infrastructure protects public health, creates jobs, and boosts the economy, and this is something that we should all support. I did want to say one thing on process, though, Mr. Chairman. The majority's insistence on scheduling the markup of this bill for the same day as the legislative hearing is unfortunate and undermines regular order. And I think these are important issues that should be given due consideration under regular order. So, Mr. Chairman, I hope that you'll support regular order moving forward. And I just thank the witnesses today and yield back the balance. I don't think anyone else on our side wants the time. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
And I thank the colleague. It's still regular, but I would admit it is fast. So the chair now, seeing that the chairman not here or the ranking member subcommittee, what we'll do is we'll turn to Dr. Gravatt from the EPA, sir. And then, of course, those members will be allowed to give their opening statement when they arrive. You're recognized for 5 minutes. 5 minutes, your whole statement's into the record. We thank you for coming.
Thank you very much. Good morning, Chairman Shimkus and members of the subcommittee. Thank you for the opportunity to be here to testify on EPA's activities to address harmful algal blooms and their impact on drinking water supplies, and on H.R. 212, the Drinking Water Protection Act. The administration has not taken a position on this piece of legislation, and today I'll provide an update on EPA's current work relevant to the bill. Cyanobacteria are found naturally in surface waters and can rapidly multiply, causing harmful algal blooms. Factors that enhance bloom formation include light intensity, nutrient availability, water temperature, and water column stability. Some species of cyanobacteria produce toxic compounds known as cyanotoxins. High levels of cyanotoxins in recreational waters and drinking water may cause a wide range of adverse health effects in humans, including fever, diarrhea, vomiting, and allergic reactions. EPA expects that community drinking water systems will continue to be vulnerable to emergency shutdowns from harmful algal blooms. H.R. 212 would direct the EPA administrator to develop a strategic plan for assessing and managing risk associated with cyanotoxins in drinking water provided by public water systems. Under the bill, EPA would be directed to identify steps and a timeline for evaluating human health risks from drinking water contaminated with harmful algal blooms, create a comprehensive list of cyanotoxins determined to be harmful to human health, develop a summary of the state of the science on human health effects of cyanotoxins and causes of cyanobacterial harmful algal blooms, recommend treatment options, and establish cooperative agreements with states and public water systems for technical assistance. Additionally, the bill would direct EPA to determine whether to publish health advisories for such cyanotoxins, as well as whether to establish guidance on analytical methods and monitoring. Providing technical assistance on harmful algal blooms to states and public water systems is a priority for the EPA. The EPA actively seeks opportunities to work collaboratively with states and public water systems, and the agency has several existing programs for providing technical assistance on drinking water issues. Currently, there are no U.S. federal regulations concerning cyanotoxins in drinking water. The Safe Drinking Water Act establishes a number of tools, including health advisories, the contaminant candidate list, the unregulated contaminant monitoring rule, to develop regulatory and non-regulatory approaches to addressing contaminants in drinking water. EPA is preparing health advisories for microcystin LR and cylindrus spermopsin, two cyanotoxins commonly associated with harmful algal blooms. The health advisories will establish concentrations of drinking water contaminants below which adverse health effects are not anticipated to occur, as well as provide states, municipalities, and other local officials with technical guidance on sampling, analytical procedures, and drinking water treatment recommendations to protect public health. We expect to finalize these health advisories in the spring of 2015. EPA's contaminant candidate list identifies unregulated contaminants that are known or anticipated to occur in public water systems and which may require regulation. The EPA uses this list to prioritize research and data collection efforts. The fourth CCL was just published yesterday, and EPA has listed several cyanobacteria or cyanotoxins on all 4 drinking water CCLs. EPA uses the unregulated contaminant monitoring rule to collect data for contaminants that do not have primary drinking water standards and are suspected to be present in drinking water. A lack of standardized analytical methods for individual cyanotoxins has prevented EPA from including them in the current and previous rounds of UCMR. The agency is currently developing specific analytical methods for microcystins, anatoxin A, and cylindrus spermopsin. EPA expects to publish these methods in the spring of 2015 in time to consider including several cyanotoxins in the 4th UCMR. Monitoring for the 4th round of the UCMR will begin in 2018. Many communities across the United States have faced issues with cyanotoxins in drinking water sources. For example, last year, Toledo's Collins Park Water Treatment Plant detected high levels of algal toxins resulting from a harmful algal bloom in western Lake Erie. U.S. EPA worked with the state of Ohio and the city of Toledo around the clock throughout the course of the weekend to confirm the concentrations of algal toxins and to optimize controlling of the toxins at the utility. Shortly after the Toledo incident, EPA redirected $12 million in Great Lakes Restoration Initiative funding to federal and state agencies to strengthen ongoing efforts to target harmful algal blooms in western Lake Erie. While monitoring and treatment are critical for providing safe drinking water, continued source water protection efforts and adequate investment in our nation's water infrastructure will be necessary to prevent events such as the one in Toledo in the future. Once again, Chairman Shimkus, Ranking Member Tonko, and members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to discuss the Drinking Water Protection Act and EPA's work on cyanotoxins in drinking water. I look forward to answering any questions you may have.
Thank you very much. I'll recognize myself for 5 minutes for the first round of questionings, and I only have 2 questions, Dr. Gravatt. Does this legislation raise any red flags because it complicates what the agency is trying to accomplish?
No, not at all.
Aside from cyanotoxins, how many other algal toxins do you believe are of concerns to the health and safety of public drinking water?
So there are many cyanotoxins out there, as we've discussed previously. There are 2 that we haven't talked about. the euglenophycins and the primnesins, which we haven't seen widely, but it's something that we need to keep our eyes on. I know the state of Ohio, along with EPA, is thinking about, looking forward to the future in terms of how do we prepare for the potential emergence of these cyanotoxins. And
I think in my opening statement, when I was just, weaving the narrative, I kind of mentioned this was a living document by which, we can add to or subtract as we go through this process, as we use good science to identify that. So with that, that's all the questions I have. I'd look to my colleagues to see anybody wants to ask a question on my time. Gentleman from Ohio.
Well, thanks, Mr. Chairman, for yielding. And again, Dr. Gravatt, thanks very much for being here, and thanks again for last fall for being at our committee hearing back in November. I know you had to come back up from New Orleans from a conference. But when we had our discussions, especially early on when all this was occurring up in my area, one of the things that you were talking about was how the EPA is working on the plans to release a health advisory, especially when we're talking to like the microcystin LRs. And I hope I pronounced this right, the cylindrospermopsin, am I close on that, in the spring of 2015. And after you've completed that independent review that you're working on right now, and I know that I think that this is a very technical, high area out there. I think there's 3 different peer reviewers on it right now. So I guess my first question is, are you on track right now to make that late spring deadline that we had talked about last year?
Yes, sir, we are.
Okay, that's great. And can you also discuss the importance of the independent scientific peer review that's going on?
Yes, as you mentioned, Congressman, there's many complicated aspects to these questions about cyanotoxins and looking at, in particular, at the toxicity literature. We don't have data that tells us about exposures to humans and human health effects. We mostly have data that relates to exposures in animals that we then have to translate to what that might mean for humans. So the peer review really helps to make sure that we're approaching this properly, that we've selected the right studies to base a health advisory on, that we've considered uncertainties appropriately, that we're thinking about potential exposures and to the life stages, children in particular, appropriately. So this is really a quality check to make, independent of EPA, to make sure that we've taken the right steps in developing the health advisory.
Thank you. And also, when we're looking at and talking about the health advisory, when we're looking at are you looking at the recommended contaminant levels, the testing? What exactly is going to be in that health advisory?
Thank you. Yes, Congressman, the health advisory will include information about sampling and analytical techniques. It'll include information about treatment technologies to remove algal toxins from drinking water supplies, and it'll also include the health information, identifying a level below which we believe that humans will be safe from exposure.
And also, I think it was also interesting in our discussions, and also when you testified last year, if you could maybe just briefly touch on, I think Ohio and 5 other states are really the only states that are out there using surface water, and the whole question about health advisories, and there's not really a standard because Ohio uses the World Health Organization. I believe Minnesota has uses it too, but at a different level. And so why is it so important that we have a health advisory that would be equal across the country that people can look to?
Right. Certainly. There are 2 aspects of this that I think are particularly important. One is development of the health advisory from the United States government, because, as you mentioned, we don't have that. States have been relying on the World Health Organization value, a 2003 value that's based on studies that go back to the late 90s. A number of other countries that have taken steps on algal toxins also rely on that World Health Organization value. There's new data that have come in since the WHO produced their value, and we're considering that in partnership with the Government of Canada. We're working very closely with the Canadians to make sure that we have a coordinated approach to this. So it'll update the toxicity information. And then the second part of this that I think is equally important is once we publish the health advisory, we're going to be reaching out to states and local communities to talk about the implementation of that health advisory. So if there's a value, when there's a value that's identified in the health advisory, we need to think about if something occurs like happened in Toledo this past summer, how do we think that health advisory value should be used? Is that a not to exceed level for one day or for a week or for something different? These conversations I think are equally important to make sure that we have a common approach across the country to dealing with this issue.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, the time that you yield to me has expired, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields back his time. The chair now recognizes the ranking member of the full committee, Mr. Pallone, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Protecting America's waters is one of EPA's priorities laid out in the President's budget for this next fiscal year, and I quote, he says, "The responsibility for communities and public water systems to continuously provide safe drinking water is a key component of the nation's health and well-being." And I agree that goal is incredibly important, and I don't think it can be achieved without significant resources. Because harmful algae blooms are just one example of the threat that could drive significant treatment and capital costs for water utilities. And so my point is we have to invest in drinking water infrastructure. There are two areas of the President's budget that I believe move us in that direction. One is the $1.1 billion allocated for the Drinking Water State Revolving Fund, a significant increase from last year. So, Dr. Gravatt, we have not had a hearing on the SRF in this subcommittee in several years. So could you briefly explain how the SRF works and how might a state like Ohio address harmful algal blooms with their SRF funds, and could these resources benefit public water systems who have to undertake infrastructure projects to address contamination, such as moving intakes or improving treatment capabilities?
Certainly. Thank you, Congressman. So EPA, through the State Revolving Loan Fund, provides grants to each of the states, allocates monies to each of the states every year, and the states in turn develop an intended use plan that's designed to fund projects that are identified by local utilities to improve infrastructure at those facilities. In addition, the Drinking Water State Revolving Loan Fund provides set-aside funds for states to provide activities like technical support to local communities who are dealing with these challenges. So the Drinking Water SRF very much can support responses to harmful algal blooms. And I know, in fact, after the Toledo event, the state of Ohio directed some of their funding that they had received from EPA through the State Revolving Loan Fund to help communities on Lake Erie to address some of the challenges with harmful algal blooms.
The budget also creates, this is the second point, a new tax-exempt qualified public infrastructure bond program that's intended to help small communities attract capital for infrastructure investment. And 97% of public water systems in the U.S. serve fewer than 10,000 people. So what are some of the unique challenges faced by small community water systems, and would the tax-exempt bond program help these small systems keep up with infrastructure needs and rising treatment costs?
Thank you very much. So we often have talked in this hearing, the previous hearing as well, about the city of Toledo. We talk less about Carroll Township nearby Toledo, who was shut down in 2013 as a result of a harmful algal bloom. And there are particular challenges that small systems face in terms of both technical capacity, financial capacity, and managerial capacity to address issues like harmful algal blooms. So it's important through the SRF and other funding opportunities for us to focus on the needs of small communities as much as we can to make sure that they're supported in these efforts. So certainly we think that the new authority, as well as the Drinking Water SRF, can help small communities to address these challenges.
And so that the tax-exempt bonds specifically would help them, as you're saying?
We believe so, yes. Okay.
I mean, I just think that this funding can make all the difference for small communities struggling to provide safe drinking water. And I just wanted to say, I think what the President has included for both of these items in his budget is important. So hopefully we'll get support for it in Congress. The other thing is, I have to say, is we can't keep cutting EPA's budget and expect our water to get cleaner. And real progress on these very serious health and environmental problems takes a sustained commitment of time and money. And I think we owe it to our constituents and to the long-term health of our communities to make the necessary investments. I mean, if you read the President's budget, so much of it is just talking about investment in the future on this and other issues. And, it's also very obvious, I'm sure everyone realizes, that when you make these kind of investments and you upgrade systems, you create a lot of jobs. It also, it brings money into the local community. So it's not only impacts the health and, the drinking water, but also is an economic boost as well. That makes a lot of sense, in my opinion. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back his time. Chair now recognizes, the gentleman from Kentucky, if he would like to ask questions. You'll pass. Gentleman from Ohio, did you get your questions done?
I think I got them, Mr. Chairman. Thank you very much.
Anyone else on the Republican side wish to ask any questions? Gentleman from West Virginia is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I remember you're in the testimony from last year. I guess it was in November of last year. I believe you were making that. I don't have all my notes from that meeting, but there was some discussion about the uniqueness of that situation up there, that there had been some dredging going on and perhaps some of the leached material and sediment in the bottom maybe have triggered some of that. I think if I recall your testimony, you said, yeah, you were aware of this, but we're going on over a year now since this issue's occurred, and how soon are we? How close are we getting to where the algae blooms? There will be a standard at the federal level.
A standard, a health advisory, sir?
Yes.
We will have that done by late spring of this calendar year.
Why? I thought I heard you say that. I was saying, why that long? I mean, the people are still out there struggling with it, and with all the resources you have to put that out, and I don't understand why there's such a delay at the bureaucratic level to get something out.
Right. The primary issue is to make sure we get it right. So, as others have discussed, we're in the midst of an independent scientific peer review of our health advisory focused on the toxicity levels we're identifying, which will be a level below which we believe that humans are not at risk from exposure to cyanotoxins, and we view that as a tremendously important level to identify and make sure we have confidence.
Well, did it occur? Was that the first reporting in the Toledo area, the Lake Erie? Was that the first time that we've had a problem with it?
With cyanotoxins? No, that's certainly not the first time we've had problems with cyanotoxins. Okay,
so based on that, I'm saying, how long does it take to develop a standard when we know we have a health hazard out there? When little communities that don't have the ability, the resources to be able to do all the testing that you were requiring, or you mentioned back in November. So how are these little communities going to do it? They need your standard, and I don't understand why it's taking so long, because last year wasn't the first time this has come up.
Right. Yes, sir. And we are, as I said, committed to having this ready before the next algal bloom season in the Great Lakes region. And so we expect that this is going to be coming in time to assist those systems, large and small, with addressing algal toxins going forward.
Okay. What about you were going to get back to us? I didn't get anything about the contribution from the zebra mussels. I know that was potentially a factor in that. Have you been able to determine in the past year whether or not they've been any contribution to that?
There's not scientific agreement at this point on the contribution of zebra mussels. There certainly are scientific studies that suggest that invasive species such as zebra mussels may contribute, as well as dredging of sediments. We know there's quite a bit of nutrients in the system, including in the sediments, and the dredging may, some believe, contribute to the growth of algal blooms, but there's not scientific agreement as yet on those questions. So
when you come up with a standard with little communities, Toledo being much larger than many, and talk about getting surface water from ponds and like, how are they going to be able? What cost are they going to face? A small community of 5,000 people or 2,000 people compared to Toledo to be able to achieve the standard? Is there going to be any assistance you're going to recommend?
Yes, sir. In particular, through the state drinking water revolving loan fund, we'll be providing resources through the states to communities, and the drinking water SRF is focused, as I said, primarily on small communities.
Are you talking through the state revolving fund?
I'm sorry?
The state revolving fund?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, but I haven't dissected the president's budget, but last year he took that and cut that almost in half, the amount of money that's coming through the SRF. So I haven't seen do we have a reduction in the SRF this year?
There's an increase in the drinking water SRF in the president's budget.
Thank you very much. I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back his time. Just a note for the public and my colleagues. It looks like they'll call votes in a few minutes. We'll try to get through this panel and maybe the opening statements of the second panel. We'll have to come back to move the bill after vote. So with that, I'd like to recognize the ranking member of the subcommittee, Mr. Tonko.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I had an opening statement that, with your indulgence, will...
Yeah, let me ask unanimous consent that all opening statements can be submitted for the record. I got that request from the chairman, too. So without objection,
thank you.
Order.
Thank you so much. And Dr. Gravatt, thank you for being here today to testify again on this very important topic. The problem of algotoxins touches on the biggest challenges facing our water utilities today: source water protection and infrastructure funding. H.R. 2212 would require EPA to identify the factors that cause harmful algae to proliferate and express toxins. Can you identify some of those factors for us?
Certainly. Among the most important are nutrients in the system, availability of light intensity in particular, warmer temperatures. Water flows are also very important in promoting the growth of toxic algae blooms.
Thank you. And the President's budget describes multiple efforts that the administration will undertake to address these factors, including funds for EPA to enhance its efforts to address nutrient pollution through partnerships with USDA and states in high-priority watersheds. Excessive levels of nitrogen and phosphorus in water sources create prime conditions for excessive algal growth. Nutrient pollution has been identified by your agency, the International Joint Commission, and other stakeholders as one of the key factors driving proliferation of harmful algal blooms. Can you describe briefly what EPA's efforts to address nutrient pollution would entail?
Yes, sir. So we'll be working with partners at the state and local level to make sure that we're addressing nutrient pollution comprehensively, thinking about the various sources of nutrients, both in large communities and small, in rural communities and urban communities, to make sure that we're minimizing the inputs of nutrients into systems like Western Lake Erie that promote the growth of algal blooms.
Thank you. And is addressing nutrient pollution important if we are indeed to address harmful algal blooms?
We believe so, yes.
Okay. And H.R. 212 would also require EPA to identify feasible treatment options to address and manage the risks posed by harmful algal blooms. You testified in November that preventative measures are the preferred and most effective approach to managing harmful algal blooms. Do you think it is important that preventative measures be included in EPA's consideration of tools to address and manage these risks?
We think it's very important that we at EPA think both about treatment at drinking water supplies as well as prevention of the growth of algal blooms in the first place, yes.
Thank you. And later today, I expect that the subcommittee will adopt an amendment to clarify that treatment options include those preventative measures. As we will hear from the second panel, treatment options to address harmful algal blooms can be very expensive. Some water systems may have to move their intake pipes or find alternative water sources, a very expensive undertaking. This will only exacerbate the high costs of replacing our crumbling drinking water infrastructure nationwide. H.R. 212 envisions EPA entering into cooperative agreements with states and affected water systems, though it does not provide funding for such agreements. The President's budget request includes significant funding for drinking water infrastructure, but that funding is already far outpaced by need. My question, does EPA currently have funding for cooperative agreements and other activities to address the risks of harmful algal blooms?
We have funds, particularly through the state drinking water revolving loan fund, to support small communities. We don't currently have a funding source that would support cooperative agreements as identified in the bill.
Well, let me just state that this bill addresses an important problem, but its impact will be indeed limited if we don't provide funding. I hope my colleagues will join me later today to ensure that funds are available to implement the strategic plan and enter into cooperative agreements. And I thank the Chair for calling this hearing, and Mr. Chair, I yield back.
Gentlemen, yield back his time. We have had a few other members join. Anybody on the Republican side wishing to ask additional questions? Seeing Mr. Murphy is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Appreciate you being here, Doctor. You're aware that with Toledo, you said this before, was forced to go without tap water for 3 days because of the algal bloom. And what was the economic impact of shutting down that drinking water system for that period of time? Do you know?
So I'm not familiar with an estimate for the city of Toledo. I can say that in Charleston, West Virginia, which was a very different situation and a longer duration, the governor of West Virginia, Governor Tomlin, estimated the economic impact of that incident as over $70 million.
I heard that for Toledo it was $1.5 million just in that water system alone. Now, do you know that Bowling Green, Ohio, also obtains its municipal water from Lake Erie?
Yes, sir.
And And you had that, and they were able to maintain that tap water. You're aware of that. Do you know why?
So we know that conventional treatment technologies, if optimized, are effective in removing algal toxins from drinking water, from source waters for drinking water. But it may be that in the case of Toledo last summer, the concentration simply overwhelmed what they could deal with at their intake.
But they have a different system for water purification than the Bowling Green facility has. What was the technology? Do you have any idea what that technology difference was that they had at Bowling Green?
I'm not familiar with the technologies that were present in Bowling Green. So.
Okay. It was activated carbon, and you may be aware, have some here, 3 to 5 grams of this, so about a sugar packet has as much surface area as a football field. This is much more than 3 to 5 grams. And I'm wondering if this is something that EPA is studying at all in terms of looking at activated carbon as a source to help us with clean water systems.
Absolutely, and Toledo, the Toledo system also used activated carbon last summer during the event.
Is this something that, as we review these issues, for example, Mr. Latta's bill, that the EPA will continue to look at of how we can use activated carbon more in this process?
Absolutely.
Then that's all I have to ask, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Gentleman yields back his time. Is there anyone else on the minority side seeking time to ask questions? Gentlelady from California is recognized for 5 minutes.
I wanted to say thank you first for holding this very important topic as a hearing.
You're very welcome.
And thank you, Dr. Gravitt, for your testimony. And as it's been said, and I just want to state, a growing body of scientific research is pointing toward global climate change as a primary factor in the emergence and proliferation of harmful algal blooms. Warming waters, elevated carbon dioxide levels, ocean acidification, rising sea levels, extreme weather events are all linked to man-made climate change and all contribute to harmful algal blooms. Addressing these risks is going to require both mitigation and adaptation. EPA is working with states to help address the many facets of this problem. Dr. Gravatt, could you describe, just briefly, I have a series of questions, some of these efforts?
Certainly. So within my office, we support efforts on climate adaptation, in particular for the water sector, helping both stormwater utilities and drinking water utilities to prepare for things like flood events, drought events, extreme weather events, whether it be hurricanes or other things. So very much we're focused on helping to build resiliency of local drinking water and wastewater treatment systems.
In your testimony, you mentioned there are effective water treatments available to remove these toxins, but that these techniques are very expensive to implement. Am I correct on that? Just a yes or a no?
There's some of those, yes, can be expensive.
And with climate change expected to make these events more frequent and severe in the future, will these adaptation costs increase or decrease over the coming years and decades?
They're likely to increase for many systems.
In following along that, do you think the current level of federal funding and resources is adequate to properly mitigate the future impacts of harmful algal blooms?
We very much are going to focus on using the available resources we have as efficiently as possible to meet this challenge.
Well, but would you say the next sentence, if you can? Do we have enough? Are we going to need more as time goes on?
I can't comment on that.
Okay. While developing a strategic plan would certainly be helpful, I'm concerned that H.R. 212, our House resolution, does nothing to help local communities actually implement the changes necessary to prevent these events in the future. And Mr. Chairman, I'm going to be introducing the Water Infrastructure Resiliency and Sustainability Act soon. And it would increase funding for local water agencies so that they can actually implement mitigation and adaptation strategies. They know what needs to be done, but if you don't have the wherewithal, you can't do it. H.R. 212 only takes the first step, and I believe there's much more that needs to be done. That's not by way of saying that I don't agree with this hearing, but I hope this is just the first step, because we need to have further hearings on the issue as to implementation. And that's where I hope, that's the direction I hope we can go, because, as has been stated, this is a problem that's only expected to get worse in the years and decades to come. And I think our next generations, we owe it to them to start doing this now. Thank you, and I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back her time. Anyone else on the majority side seeking time? Anyone else? And then for my colleagues, we're going to recess after the first panel, and then we'll come back and we'll panel the second panel, finish that testimony, then we'll move into the markup just for information. Chair recognizes gentleman from California, Mr.
Thank you,
Attorney.
Mr. Chairman. I'm going to change the subject slightly and talk about groundwater in California, if you don't mind too much. We're in the third year of a very severe drought. At the same time, California is the third largest oil producer in the United States. But a recent article in San Francisco Chronicle highlighted that California aquifers have been contaminated by drilling operations. It's my understanding that the EPA has given California until tomorrow to present additional plans on how to fix the problem. EPA Regional Administrator Jared Blumenfeld said, and I quote, "If there are wells having a direct impact on drinking water, we need to shut them down now." Are there any wells that the EPA is targeting to shut down?
So EPA is working very closely with the state of California as they develop this plan that you just mentioned that they'll be submitting tomorrow, which is designed to make sure they're fully in compliance with the Safe Drinking Water Act on their underground injection control program within 2 years.
Okay. Is there anything that triggers the EPA to be more involved in overseeing and monitoring the Safe Water Drinking Act funds in areas that are experiencing drought?
We certainly are working, as I mentioned, with communities, both large and small, that are facing drought challenges. And so we're focused on trying to support those communities in becoming as resilient as possible to drought, yes.
Okay. Last December, 2014, there's a letter that also mentions the EPA has strengthened oversight of the oil and gas underground injection control program. What has the EPA done with that new authority?
So there's not a new authority, but we have been working, as I said, with the state of California to make sure that their program, that they're implementing underground injection control programs in full compliance with the Safe Drinking Water Act. We've been working very cooperatively with them on that.
Okay. Well, apparently there's a 1983 agreement between the EPA and the California regulators, and the agreement listed some specific aquifers considered exempt. By exempt, that means the process can inject wastewater into the aquifer. But there are 2 signed copies of this agreement. One has a list of 11 aquifers that are exempt, and the other doesn't have those aquifers listed. Could you explain that or give me some insight?
Yeah, so that 1983 document is actually the original primacy application from the state of California, which EPA granted primacy for them to implement the underground injection control program. And so as we've worked with the state of California, we have discovered there's been some confusion with the historical record on this. So the focus of our work with the state of California going forward has been to make sure that the aquifer exemptions are implemented properly in the state of California.
Okay, this is an area that I think needs a lot more scrutiny, and I appreciate your consideration. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back his time. Now I'll recess this hearing and return. We'll ask my colleagues to return as promptly as possible after the last vote, and then we'll impanel the second panel. And we want to thank you, Dr. Gravatt, for being here. We've seen you now, twice in the last 4 months, and we look forward to working with you. Thank you very much. We're going to call the hearing back to order and welcome our second panel and continue to move through the process. So thank you for coming. Thank you for many of you or your associations being here, last fall or last November, I guess. And we will go in order of the table. I'll do the introduction and then ask you to do your 5-minute opening statement. Your full statement is submitted for the record. So I'd like to first introduce Mr. Mike Baker, Chief Division of Drinking Water and Groundwaters from the Ohio Environmental Protection Agency. Thank you for your service. We look forward to hearing your testimony. You're recognized for 5 minutes. And the mic, there's a button in the middle there.
There we go. Okay.
And pull it a little bit closer so
Thank you,
everyone who wants to.
And good morning, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Tonko, and subcommittee members. My name is Michael Baker. I'm administrator of the Public Drinking Water Program in the state of Ohio, and also a recent past president of the Association of State Drinking Water Administrators, on whose behalf I'm testifying here this morning. Ohio EPA Director Craig Butler testified before this subcommittee in November of 2014 on the subject of harmful algal blooms, and in particular, Ohio's experience with the August 2014 incident in Toledo, when nearly 500,000 people were told they could not drink the water due to elevated levels of microcystin. Today, I'll frame my remarks in the context of the various components of H.R. 212, but in consideration of the lessons learned during the events in Toledo and the activities we've undertaken since that event. We support the bill's emphasis on a strategic plan. It's become abundantly clear that solving the problems associated with harmful algal blooms needs to be done holistically and thoughtfully rather than piecemeal. It's appropriate to establish and update a list of harmful cyanotoxins and associated information on their toxicity. Such a list will drive the work undertaken in other parts of the strategy, such as refining the health assessments, analytical methods, and treatment effectiveness. We also think it's reasonable that priority be placed on those toxins most likely to occur in drinking water at levels of concern. Assessing adverse health effects from cyanotoxins is the most critical element of the bill. At present, individual states are forced to develop their own health benchmarks. We need a national approach based on sound science and welcome EPA-derived health advisories. There are a host of assumptions and policy ramifications that need to be considered in establishing advisory level, and states need to be engaged in those considerations before a number is finalized. And I want to acknowledge Dr. Gavat and EPA for their support of Ohio and for recently engaging a small group of state representatives for deliberation on these important decisions. Additional information on the ecology of cyanobacteria, including what triggers them to produce toxins, is needed. Guidance is needed on strategies for early detection of blooms and the appropriate frequency of monitoring at public water systems. This is also an area in which consultation and coordination with agencies such as NOAA and NASA is essential. We agree with the bill's emphasis on analytical methods. More work is needed to evaluate the capabilities and applicability of all appropriate analytical methods and how they can be used in tandem with one another. The determination of appropriate analytical methods also relates to how health advisories are expressed. For example, if the level for a single congener for microcystin LR, or if it includes microcystin LR and equivalents. We are fortunate that cyanobacteria and associated toxins are generally removed with conventional surface water treatment at our public water systems, but it is costly and in no way a straightforward problem, and ongoing research and guidance on treatment technologies is needed. We appreciate the bill's emphasis on EPA providing assistance to affected states and water systems through cooperative agreements. This is an essential role and one I believe EPA strives to fulfill with available resources. We would respectfully point out that there's an important role for Congress in this regard to adequately fund EPA, states, and water systems in support of our collective efforts. The bill properly includes a requirement for consultation with other federal agencies, state public water systems, international agencies, research, and academic institutions. My experience with the Toledo water system this past summer showed that it's a team effort comprised of federal, state, and local experts, as well as academic institutions, and that was needed to address the challenges we faced in Toledo. Finally, I'll note that the most reliable and, in the long run, the most protective of public health is a multi-barrier approach. That starts with protecting sources of drinking water. We believe it's extremely important that we collectively stay focused on the root cause of algal blooms. These problems are ultimately the result of point and non-point sources of nitrogen and phosphorus pollution. In conclusion, we strongly believe that federal, state, and local leaders need to work closely together in partnership to quickly advance the science to detect and effectively treat cyanotoxins in drinking water, to scientifically derived safe levels. We also need to stay focused on the root cause of the problem. We believe the steps articulated in H.R. 212 are an appropriate series of actions to be taken at this time, and as for when the states look forward to working with you in tackling this challenging issue. Thank you for the opportunity to testify, and look forward to answering any questions.
Thank you very much. Now I'd like to recognize Mr. Earl Arndt, Chief Executive Officer of Lehigh County Authority in the state of Pennsylvania, on behalf of the American Water Works Association. And before I recognize you for 5 minutes, he was accompanied early this morning by a colleague of ours, Mr. Charlie Dent, so we don't want to hold that against him as he gives his testimony, but it was good to see Charlie walk into our chamber to say hi to you. So with that, sir, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, members of the subcommittee. My name is Earl Arndt. I am Chief Executive Officer of Lehigh County Authority based in Allentown, Pennsylvania. I am also chair of the American Water Works Association Water Utility Council. I deeply appreciate the opportunity to offer input on the critical issues surrounding algal blooms, cyanotoxins in drinking water sources, and H.R. 212, the Drinking Water Protection Act. As the chairman said, I am here on behalf of the American Water Works Association today. Established in 1881, AWWA is the world's oldest and largest nonprofit scientific and educational association dedicated to water. Our utility members provide safe and affordable water every day to more than 70% of the American population. My remarks today reflect the experiences and perspectives of AWWA's nearly 50,000 members. As you know, we are brought here today largely due to the algal bloom in Lake Erie last August that resulted in the formation of a toxin known as microcystin, requiring the City of Toledo to issue a do not drink advisory to its customers. We also know that other water systems that rely on lakes and reservoirs for their drinking water supplies have also had to wrestle with algal blooms. The formation of algal toxins is very complex and not fully understood. Similarly, the same can be said for the possible human health effects of cyanotoxins. But one thing is very clear. The problem is always associated with excessive amounts of nitrogen and phosphorus in the water. According to the U.S. Geological Survey, non-point sources, predominantly runoff and deposition from the air, account for 90% of the nitrogen and 75% of the phosphorus in our waters. We believe the most sensible strategy for reducing the scope and severity of this problem is bringing non-point sources of nutrient pollution under more effective management. There are some federal programs that have a bearing on nutrients in our water, such as the conservation title of the Farm Bill. However, these conservation programs are largely voluntary in nature. Drinking water treatment technology exists to allow utilities to remove toxins produced by algal blooms. However, this technology is very expensive to install and maintain. In addition, removing these toxins after they occur does nothing to protect the ecosystem and the people within the watershed. As a utility manager, the protection of public health is always my most important priority, as it is for American Water Works and all of its membership. Even before this summer's event, AWWA had taken steps to help water systems at risk from algal events. They include the following. First, developing and distributing information to assist water systems in anticipating and responding to source water challenges, including cyanobacterial blooms and cyanotoxins. Also, AWWA is preparing a Water Utilities Manager Guide to Cyanotoxins, which will be published later this month. Having said these things, utility managers can't solve this problem on their own. We do need federal help. Federal agencies, including EPA and USDA, should use existing authorities to give much higher priority to nutrient reduction projects that protect downstream drinking water supplies. For example, the Clean Water State Revolving Loan Fund and the Farm Bill conservation programs could be targeted and used more effectively to reduce nutrient pollution and protect our drinking water sources. With regard to drinking water regulation, we support the methodical science-based standard setting process in the Safe Drinking Water Act. EPA has already placed some cyanotoxins on its contaminant candidate list and has indicated that it will use the unregulated contaminant monitoring rule process to help determine whether regulation of cyanotoxins would afford a meaningful opportunity to protect public health. We certainly support these efforts. We applaud the goal of H.R. 212 to have EPA develop a strategic plan to protect people from cyanotoxins when they appear in source waters. EPA has already begun work on developing health advisories for 2 of those, as we heard earlier. We also commend the bill's author, Congressman Latta, for not disrupting the effective established processes in the Safe Drinking Water Act for determining whether or not a substance should be regulated. We offer the technical expertise of our membership to Congress and EPA as we all continue to work to protect the public from potential health threats in the environment. However, I must emphasize, we also ask that Congress consider ways to increase the effectiveness of non-point source pollution programs. They should include discussing whether non-point pollution should be brought under the jurisdiction of the Clean Water Act, and if so, the appropriate way to do so. To reemphasize what we said in similar testimony last fall, we believe it would not be equitable to put an additional burden on water systems and their customers to solve problems if the most significant sources of nutrient pollution are not also asked to do more. In closing, I would like to thank the subcommittee for the leadership it is taking today in holding this hearing. I'd be happy to answer any questions both today and in the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now I'd like to turn to Ms. Christy Myers, who's representing the Ohio Environmental Council. Again, you're recognized for 5 minutes. Your full statement's in the record.
Thank you, and good afternoon. Mr. Chairman, Mr. Ranking Member, and members of the subcommittee, I want to thank you for allowing me to testify before you today on the Drinking Water Protection Act, introduced by the Honorable Bob Latta. My name is Christy Meyer, and I'm the Managing Director of Agricultural, Health, and Clean Water Programs with the Ohio Environmental Council. Our organization, the OEC, is a 46-year non-for-profit advocacy organization whose mission is to secure healthy air, land, and water for all who call Ohio home. On behalf of the OEC, I'd like to thank Representative Latta for introducing this piece of legislation and this subcommittee for holding this hearing today. I have with me an updated version of my testimony. I apologize that you don't have it, but I was given very little time to turn it around. I will never forget Saturday, August 2nd, 2014. At 8 a.m., my good friend from Toledo called me. She was talking so fast. She told me that Toledo area residents weren't able to drink their water. She told me she had a cup of coffee that morning and used tap water and asked me if she'd be okay. My head started spinning thinking about this news, all those people without drinking water, and boiling that water would further concentrate those toxins. Imagine parents telling their children that they can't drink the water or that they should not touch the water, or hospital staff trying to ensure the safety of their patients, or local mom and pop businesses temporarily closing their doors to protect their customers. While thankfully nobody was hurt during this emergency, some small businesses unfortunately paid the ultimate price. How could this be? A modern American city in a first world nation dealing with third world water problems. This news spread like a wildfire, reaching the furthest parts of the globe, giving the U.S., Ohio, Toledo, and Lake Erie a black eye. Clean potable water is essential to life, and according to the U.S. EPA, there's not one state in this nation that has not experienced a harmful algal bloom. And in fact, in Ohio, Lake Erie is not the only lake that has experienced a harmful algal bloom. In 2010, more than 10 inland lakes also experienced a harmful algal bloom. So if this bill is enacted, as the U.S. EPA moves forward in developing this report, it is essential that the agency take into consideration the whole body burden of these toxins when establishing recommendations for standards, which should, along with recreational activities, consider fish and shellfish consumption as part of what is considered for other purposes. It is vitally important to ensure safe drinking water, but we cannot continue to diagnose the symptoms and expect this problem to go away. According to the Ohio Phosphorus Task Force, we need to, in Ohio, slash nutrients flowing into Lake Erie by 40% at least. Members of the Ohio Phosphorus Task Force included the Ohio Environmental Council, federal and state local agencies, the Ohio Farm Bureau, Ohio Agribusiness Association, and the Ohio Certified Crop Advisors. Achieving this 40% reduction goal means that we need to protect our waterways and wetlands. Meandering streams can help assimilate nutrients, allowing nutrients and sediments to fall out of the waterway as it flows down the river, whereas straightened ditches move the nutrients quickly into the next receiving body, and in Ohio, such as the Maumee and then Lake Erie. We also must slash phosphorus from all sources, such as wastewater treatment plants and sewer overflows, and farm field runoff. We cannot, however, allow for the wastewater treatment plants to bear the burden of this reduction alone, especially when, according to the Ohio Phosphorus Task Force, the major culprit in Ohio and Lake Erie is farm field runoff. We must ensure that each farmer samples their soil using precision soil sampling techniques for the appropriate amount of fertilizer to be applied, as well as develop and implement a nutrient management plan at the very minimum. So in conclusion, in Ohio, we always say that Lake Erie is the canary in the coal mine for the Great Lakes region. The week and without water crisis is a wake-up call not just for Ohio, but for our nation. Our waterways are at risk from excessive nutrient pollution. We must address this problem for the health and safety of our children and grandchildren. And this bill will help ensure safeguards are in place to protect our families and future generations. But without the end goal being the protection and attainment of water quality in our waterways, I fear we will only continue to treat the symptoms. The OEC thanks Representative Latta once again in this subcommittee for holding this hearing today and allowing me to testify before you. I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you very much. And I'd like to recognize myself 5 minutes for the questions of this panel. And my first question will go to Mr. Baker. Based on the lessons learned from this event last fall, will this bill, do you perceive this bill to be helpful to improve protocols for testing and data analysis?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, I do think that it will. As I stated in my testimony, it covers all the basis of needs that we have identified, first off by establishing a national health advisory number so that states aren't developing those numbers on their own, developing, analyzing, giving us robust analytical methods, and further information on treatment technologies. So yes.
What are the analytical methods that you see that are critical upon the previous experiences with algae and source water?
I think that there's a couple that we want to be looking at. The state of Ohio has utilized the ELISA-ADA methodology, which looks at total microsystem, which we believe is important, and it's also a relatively quick and relatively inexpensive method so that public water systems can monitor what's in their source water, the effectiveness of their treatment, and the water that they're producing. But we also believe that there may be more robust methods that are appropriate when making determinations on final safety of water.
Thank you. And Mr. Arndt, in your testimony, you state that drinking water utilities would also appreciate technical assistance and cooperative agreement provided for in H.R. 212 to aid in managing the cyanotoxin risk. Can you elaborate a little bit more? I think the microphone. You hit the button there. Thank you.
Thank you. We would value and welcome any new research findings with regard to detection, monitoring, and practical and affordable treatment technologies. Some of our utilities and research entities associated with our association would be very interested in helping to pilot test such technologies and methods. We also would be appreciative of additional research to develop a more thorough understanding of why and how these blooms occur. There's multiple moving parts that have an effect on the generation of cyanotoxins. Such information could perhaps in turn lead to the development of early warning technologies that could be applied by water systems across the country.
So the association considers this bill helpful in moving the ball forward on the problems addressed?
I'll say that again, I'm sorry.
So your association considers this as a helpful legislation to move us forward in trying to obtain the goals that you've outlined?
Yes, we do. It is not by itself the solution to all of the issues, but certainly it is something that should facilitate answering those needs.
Just a step in the right direction. Let's hope. That's all the questions I have. Does anyone want to use the balance of my time for a question or two? If not, I'll yield back my time and yield to, then I'll ask the ranking member, Ms. Tonko, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Welcome to our panel. Last November, we discussed the crisis in Lake Erie, where a toxin-producing algal bloom forced the closure of a major drinking water system. 500,000 people in Toledo, Ohio, had no safe tap water for several days. Treating pollution after it has entered our drinking water sources is obviously costly and inefficient. Mr. Baker, what funding did the state of Ohio provide to water utilities to respond to the cyanotoxin emergency of last year?
Immediately following, thank you, Ranking Member, immediately following the events in Toledo, we made $50 million available for zero interest loans for water systems to install additional treatment or avoidance strategies such as new intakes or storage. And we received applications in weeks to exceed that amount. Another thing that we did was we made up to $1 million available in grants for water system to improve their early detection and analytical capabilities.
So $50 million, and you said you received applications in excess. So that amount wasn't limited by the need of water utilities, but it was more about what the state had available?
Based upon what we had available and what we could make available out of existing SRF funding.
Okay, thank you. And Ohio is far from the only state affected. Next year, Ohio or other states may not have that funding available. Mr. Arndt, without funding from states or the federal EPA, would it be difficult for water utilities to absorb the cost of treating for cyanotoxins?
Water utilities use a multiplicity of sources to fund their infrastructure and technology that is necessary to provide treatment. And a key part of that is the federal funding that is made available through the state revolving loan funds. And so, yes, it is an important tool, particularly for smaller systems, as was stated in the earlier hearing. And what AWWA has supported is developing a broad array of financing tools, recognizing that not every tool fits every need.
Mm-hmm. But in terms of that funding mechanism, the difficulty remains in terms of treating the water supply. So would that be passed on to consumers?
Water systems are largely funded by borrowed funds, which need to be at some point retired, and interest needs to be paid on that funding. And the source of revenues for most every water system, and it has been the policy of our association to support the costs of running water systems from the revenues derived from users. So yes, those revenues would ultimately be derived from customers.
Unfortunately, the algal toxins are just one of the contamination issues associated with nutrient pollution. Nitrate is another serious concern. Nutrient pollution required a municipal water utility to invest over millions of dollars in a nitrate removal facility. Operating that facility at peak capacity cost the utility some $7,000 a day. This summer, the utility spent over $500,000 on nitrate removal alone. And the problem is only getting worse. That utility has now said that they will be unable to meet their customers' water demands without regulation of pollutants in their source water. So, Mr. Arndt, as nutrient pollutant levels continue to rise, should we expect treatment costs to go up for many of our municipal water utilities?
I think it's clear that there's a correlation between enhanced or increased treatment requirements and the investment in facilities, not just in the capital, but also for the operation of those facilities, that the result of that is increased user charges.
Mm-hmm. And can huge capital costs like building a new $4 million plant be absorbed by water utilities?
Say again, please.
Sure. Can huge capital costs like that of building a new $4 million plant be absorbed by our water utilities?
That is very much a question which is unique to each individual system and its circumstances. Certainly, there are systems that have challenges because of the affordability of water rates already, and so in those cases, any added costs are certainly just going to add to that burden and make it more onerous. And there are other systems that certainly may be able to handle.
Has AWWA done any estimates on what might be needed over the next decades or two?
Yes, we have. We prepared a report a couple years ago called Buried No Longer, which evaluated the water main replacement costs that we will face in the country over the next 25 and 40 years. And the estimate for the next 25 years was that we would have to spend across the country approximately $1 trillion for the replacement of aged water mains, and over 40 years that number would be about $1.7 trillion.
Thank you very much. I yield back, Mr. Chair.
Gentleman yields back his time. Chair now recognizes, I think, the gentleman from Ohio for 5 minutes.
Well, thanks again, Mr. Chairman. Thanks again for holding the hearing today. And again, thanks for our panel for appearing today and presenting testimony. And Mr. Baker, if I could ask first couple questions to you, but first I just want to again thank Ohio EPA and the great coordination went on, again, as I mentioned to Dr. Ravat earlier this morning about what had happened with U.S. EPA working with Ohio EPA, and of course all the departments and agencies in Ohio working together, from the Department of Natural Resources, the Department of Agriculture, and of course the City of Toledo and all the other local governments that were involved. So I just want to thank you again. But my first question is on microcystin LR is believed to be one of the most common and toxic of the algotoxins. Given the current gaps on health effects data, is it possible there may be other algotoxins or variants or even that are of greater health concern that aren't known yet due to these gaps?
Thank you, Representative Lauda. We know that there are a number of different types of cyanotoxins. We know that there are tens of different types of variants of each of those toxins, of which there's research out there that indicates that some of them are more toxic than LR. We do think that there are significant gaps that need to be filled on that. I think that's why the approach in H.R. 212 of establishing a list of these potential toxins and collecting information, compiling information on their relative toxicity is a critical first step.
Yeah, thank you. And also, can you discuss how you believe the bill tackles and helps these long-term issues that we could have, especially with these unknown and these gaps that we could have be occurring out there?
Well, as I mentioned, the first step is just understanding what the total universe is of the toxins that are out there and what the potential health effects are, and then using that as a basis for developing further information on what their actual human health toxicological impacts are, analytical methods for even testing for them to see if they're present in our water supplies, and then certainly advancing treatment technologies to address them. So I think logically those are the approaches that we should be taking to address toxins in drinking water.
Well, and finally, how do the water treatment facilities in the Ohio EPA treat drinking water in which testing samples indicate multiple variants of microcystin, given that different variants have different toxin potency?
Thank you, Representative. Our approach, in accordance with Ohio's strategy, is that we look at the total microcystin, and that we know that there is research out there that indicates that some of the variants of microcystin may be less toxic than LR, but there's studies out there that would indicate that there are some variants that are more toxic than LR. So our recommended approach is that where we have standards and we have analytical methods to look for those variants, we should be looking at not only at microcystin LR, but their equivalents, and looking at those as a whole so that we are most protective of public health.
Thank you. Mr. Arndt, in your testimony you state that it was wise in the legislation that we have before us today to ask for a strategic plan for addressing cyanotoxins rather than requiring a specific date for final human health effects findings, monitoring, and analytical methods, desired treatment options, and the like. Could you expound on that a little bit, why you think why that's important? Okay. Well, thank you. If you could get that to the committee, we'd appreciate it. And then, Ms. Meyer, if I could just, in my remaining time, ask, as you heard this morning with Dr. Gravatt and what they're looking at on establishing the health advisories and getting the information, because, of course, with Ohio using the World Health Organization and other states doing the same, what do you see as the importance of having that standard set by the EPA for the health advisory instead of having the World Health Organization?
Thank you, Congressman. Well, I certainly think it's very important that the U.S. EPA sets that standards. They're the ones that are consistently looking at the pollutants and the toxins that are in our air and our water and determining what a healthy level is for our body. And recognize that right now they are taking a look at some health criteria and looking at the whole body burden. So I think it's essential that the U.S. EPA be the leader in establishing these standards.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, my time has expired, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields back his time. Chair now recognizes the ranking member of the full committee, Mr. Pallone, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I wanted to ask some questions of Mr. Arndt. First, let me say harmful algal blooms and cyanotoxins present a significant threat to safe drinking water, and I recognize that working to overcome this issue has not been easy or cheap for both states and drinking water systems, and I applaud the efforts you've made. The bill, H.R. 212, would continue us on this path forward, requiring EPA to draft a strategic plan for addressing the problem, providing important guidance to states and water systems, and entering into cooperative agreements. So, Mr. Arndt, do you see these as positive steps forward, first of all? You know, the bill and what's the bill suggesting. Is your phone,
you need to check the microphone again.
Sorry. I'm a firm believer in developing a plan whenever attempting to address any complex undertaking, and it seems to me that the framework that is established within House H.R. 212 represents a outline of a good plan and effort that can help us to answer the unanswered questions and obtain the information necessary to deal with these threats.
Okay, thanks. But the plan's only going to be effective if it's implemented, and as we heard from the first panel, EPA will need funding to implement the plan and enter into cooperative agreements. So would you agree that EPA will need resources to implement this plan and enter into these kinds of agreement with states and water utilities?
Well, I think that ultimately rests with the determination that comes out of the effort that is pursued as a result of the plan. There is no presumption in this legislation that there is a need for a specific regulation on cyanotoxins or cyanobacteria. That is the outcome of the work that would be accomplished under that plan. And so to state at this point that there will be a necessary investment is, I think, premature.
Did you want to say something, Mr. Baker, on that?
I think that EPA is expending a lot of resources to address several of the key elements that are identified and they would be required to address in the strategy in doing the science behind health advisories and analytical methods. I guess I would equate it to a bandwidth type issue, as you know, they can only do so much with the resources that they have available, and given the critical nature of the health threat that we face with this, more resources to advance the science quicker I think would be advantageous, as well as they enter into the real cooperative agreements with states and public water systems, and providing direct technical assistance takes a substantial amount of resources, both at the federal level, state, and the local level.
Okay. I mean, I mention it because the President's budget includes significant funding for drinking water infrastructure through the State Revolving Fund and a new bond measure. Let me go back to Mr. Arndt, and then I'll ask Mr. Baker. Would you think that the increased funding, I mean, what would that kind of increased funding that the President's budget proposed mean for water utilities like yours, if that was made available?
It's a significant need for water infrastructure funding in order to meet all of the challenges that are before us, including dealing with new and emerging contaminants that are going to be regulated. And certainly any sources that the federal government can bring to bear can certainly assist in meeting that need.
You want to answer that too, Mr. Baker?
I would agree with Mr. Arndt that there's tremendous infrastructure needs at our public water systems, including specific needs to address harmful algal blooms, and the money available through the SRF is a tremendous tool to assist public water systems in doing that.
Well, the budget also calls for more concerted efforts to address nutrient pollution. So let me just ask Ms. Myers, do you think that funding is important as well? To ask you the same question.
Thank you, Congressman. Certainly, I do think that the funding is important to address the nutrient pollution, but there is always more need than there is funding. And so, certainly we've been doing a really good job at targeting that funding in the most, I would say, nutrient hotspots, but we need to continue to fully fund these programs to make sure that we are protecting our water quality.
All right. I mean, I just say, Mr. Chairman, that my concern is that we can't expect new work like the strategic plan under this bill to come out of existing funds that are already stretched thin. I mean, that's my whole point here. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Gentlemen, yield back time. Chair, now recognize the gentleman from West Virginia, Mr. McKinley, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and also for Congressman Latta for bringing this to our attention and really shedding a light on this whole subject of funding for our clean water and drinking water programs. I've heard now several people testify that the SRF actually got more money. And I just heard from the ranking member say that increased funding. But I've got here a report from the ASC, the American Society of Civil Engineers, that the funding has been reduced to the SRF. So I'm just curious that I'm in the budget. Mr. Chairman, did I hear wrongly that he said that they increased the funding for the SRF?
The gentleman would yield.
Yes.
I think the issue was there was reduction in the last budget year, and the President's proposed an increase in this budget year.
But the report I'm getting from the American Society of Civil Engineers say it's actually been reduced by 2.5%. Over the previous amount that was put in, because the President had markedly reduced the money, the SRF, last year, and it was the Appropriation Committee put money back in to get it to a higher level, and he's reduced it again. The President's reduced it again. So I'm concerned whether or not that they understand the problem we're facing here. The American Water Works Association has already indicated they have over $1 trillion. They've identified over $1 trillion of water infrastructure problems, but yet they keep reducing the amount of money available because most communities rely very heavily on the SRF. And once again, we're going to have to see if we can pump money back up into that. So I'm, again, representing small communities. I don't have a town in my district over 30,000 people. And when they're facing some of the problems that are going to be having to address with Latta's issue or others, how are we going to get the money? What are some of the projections of how we might be able to find the money if the administration keeps slashing money out of the SRF? I don't care whoever wants to take that on.
Thank you. Well, I think, as I've indicated, our experience is that the SRF has been an extremely valuable tool in helping particularly small, medium-sized public water systems in addressing their infrastructure needs and being able to provide them below market funding and other incentives to address highly needed infrastructure repairs and replacements. So we continue to support the funding of the SRF at levels that support that, and we appreciated seeing the increased level proposed this year.
Yeah, I'm glad the Congress put the money back in, but I hate seeing the fact that the administration now has reduced it and trying to represent through Dr. Gravatt that was increased. when you look at the sheer numbers, we're talking about 50 to 55,000 treatment facilities across America. Not all of which are getting surface water, but probably a great number of them are in that. And I'm just concerned how we're going to readdress this long-term issue of funding, especially if it's $1 trillion that's out there in that requirement. Mr. Arndt?
The American Water Works Association has long supported funding through to the SRF programs, and I think it's accurate to say that the SRFs have never been funded to the full level of the authorization for those programs, and yet at the same time the need for funding has grown, not just with inflation but with the aging of facilities and increasing regulatory requirements and other needs. So I think your point is very well made that more additional funding is necessary, and there is no one single source that is going to resolve that shortfall. We need to look at a multiplicity of sources that can be applied to making those infrastructure investments that we need to make sure that we have safe water and we continue to provide the services that are needed to support our economy.
Thank you. You're back to balance my time.
Gentleman yields back his time. Chair recognizes the gentlelady from California. Do you have questions? Thank you. Just turning to my side, anyone that would like time for questions? Seeing none, we want to thank the panel for joining us today, and we look forward to working with you. This is a step in the right direction. Are there more actions required in the future? Maybe, and we'll address those as we move forward. I want to thank my colleagues for bearing with us on the hearing today. And I ask unanimous consent to include letters from the American Water Works Association and Clean Water Action. And Mike, I'm sorry, the Association of Metropolitan Water Associations. Is there objection? Hearing none, so ordered, and we will adjourn this hearing and reconvene promptly for the markup.